Okay, so what we're doing here is working on a 6-liter Power Stroke. Actually, nothing wrong was wrong with this truck, except it had a bad oil leak. And the oil leak was coming from this gasket right around the oil pump. So I got to the point where I was removing the cover and the bolts were loose. So anyway, this is what you have to do to get to this point. Say you're going to replace the high pressure oil pump, which is now pretty self-explanatory. You got 4 bolts and a fitting that you usually replace when you do that. But getting to here, you have to remove the intake, which is kind of shaped like a U. It comes, you know, from the head to the front to the other head. And one note to make is when you're reinstalling these intake gaskets, look which way they go. Okay, because this one was put on backwards, so it's kind of restricting this hole here and is a potential to leak because it's pushed more over to one side versus this side. You can see there it's perfectly centered. So this is, it's not that big a job. It looks a lot worse than it is. So this is the intake. You've got I don't know, 8, 16 bolts, plus a few more that hold the EGR cooler to the bottom. Good time when you have this out to go ahead and clean it out, pressure wash it, do what you need to do. You can see the inside, it gets pretty nasty. You know, another tip on these trucks, this is the EGR cooler. While you have this out, if you're able to, if you're in a state where you're able to, do a delete kit, get rid of this. If you're in a state where you're supposed to have it, here's what you do. Cut out a little piece of aluminum that fits just perfectly in between the gaskets and sandwich that baby in there. That goes right back there on the exhaust, on the up pipe. Sandwich that baby in there so there's not exhaust coming into the intake. That's just the dumbest design that we've come up as a species with. Have a good look at your turbo. Make sure there's no slop. It's supposed to have a little bit, you know, because you know it's a floated bearing, floated by the oil. So on the inside of this one's been remanufactured, but you can see that seal has started to leak on the inside, so go ahead and have this rebuilt. But this is the cover. Now there's 2 types. This is the earlier style, so you do have to remove the complete intake, EGR cooler and everything. There's another style, I think they started in 04 or 05, and it actually goes, this piece right here is cut out and has an O-ring around here, and you can actually remove that one without removing the intake and the EGR cooler. But while you're going to this much trouble, it's good to remove everything and inspect it and replace what needs to be replaced. In this case, this was just a leak. The bolts got loose, and the O-ring has lost its squish, so it just started leaking really bad. So that's pretty much all we're doing. You know, reseal everything with new O-rings. We'll have the turbo done And this engine's actually been bulletproof, so it has the ARP head studs, and it's a real beast. But anyway, let's see, what else? We're going to put a new injector harness. That's one of the worst parts of taking this apart to this extent, is the harness. At this age, you're going to have to make some repairs. There's one of these. I don't know where it's at now, which one it was, but it actually did break off, so I have to do some wiring repairs. This is the IPR valve. This regulates the pressure from the high pressure oil pump, and it's screwed in right here at the side, at the top. I think this is well, I can't remember what size it was actually. Anyway, this one was contaminated a bit. As you can see, there's some what looks to be, I won't focus, but some kind of particles on there. And the O-ring, which was actually pushed off, I actually just pushed it back on, but it was actually pushed off and it split in half. So this truck was really close to having some issues. So it's a good thing we did this. So we're going to go ahead and replace the IPR valve. And then once you have the top cover off, there's a screen. I don't know if you can see it. It's so hard to see through this camera, but you light it up. Okay, there's a screen right there. That's another thing you want to inspect. If you have a bunch of particles in that screen, definitely replace the pump. I don't care if you're just in here for a leak, replace the pump. This one is pretty clean. It did have a bunch of sealing particles in there, pieces of O-rings and whatnot, and I think that's what this stuff is here, because it's mushy. So no medical particles, we're okay. For the guys just in here doing a turbo, really simple. It looks kind of intimidating, but it's really simple. You only have the up pipes and then the down pipe to disconnect, and then you have the turbo pedestal. And here, I'll show you this. You have the turbo pedestal, which sits in the engine, kind of like that. And you're going to have two bolts, one on either side, and then you're going to have one bolt in the back, which holds the turbo. And then you have your drainage pipe, which comes up through here, which you really don't need to mess with. You just lift the turbo and it'll come off, and then you just have your wiring connector here for your solenoid, and then your charge line. And the turbo comes out. I think I had the turbo out in, I don't know, 40 minutes. It was really easy, really fast. But yeah, that's it. So a good look at what we have apart here. If you're doing this yourself, it's some time, but it's not that bad. Some people remove the wiring harnesses. I leave them there because it's easier to get them hooked back up, because everything is kind of hardened in its spot where it's supposed to go. I did remove the fickum because it makes it easier to move this harness around when you're undoing the bolts from the intake. I'd say one of the hardest parts is getting the bolts out of the back heat shield on that top hpop cover. And for that, I actually broke it loose up top, and then I went down below with a long extension with a 10mm swivel on the end, and that made it pretty easy. I just unscrewed them by hand from there. So going back together, we're going to clean all this up, put on a new gasket. Always remember to silicone these right here in the back two corners, because that's where the rear plate of the engine bolts against the block, and there's a little seam right here. And in time, the O-ring will lose its squish enough to get down in that seam, enough to seal it, so silicone. If not, you'll be tearing this back apart. What else? I think that's about it. Your oil filter housing comes apart with the fuel filter housing. I pretty much leave it all together just like that. Keep it upside down, keeps all the fluids in. Yeah, see, this truck was, this is remanufactured in 2010, April of 2010. So this truck underwent kind of a rebuild in 2010. It's an 04. But I'd say one of the most important parts is capping off the back of this EGR cooler, because these are, they're just awful, man. There's no other way to say it. They're just awful. They kill motors. But if you can do it and get away with it, do a delete. But this one, if it still needs to be there for visual sake, best way to do is just cap that inside. No one will ever know the difference. And you're golden. So, anyway, that's it, guys. This is an 04 F450, 6-liter power stroke. Anyway, a little bit of info on doing the pump. We're not actually removing the pump on this one, but you get the point. See ya.